Hey there, Lake Grove Church. Pastor Mark McElraith here. And today is Monday, February 14th. And we are on page number 329 of our Reservoir devotional reading. If you haven't had a chance to read that, I encourage you to pause the video right here and go read that text. We're also looking at Genesis chapter 2, verses 15 through 24, a snapshot in the Garden of Eden. And so I encourage you to take a look at those texts and come back and join us. Well, after reading that text and after reading the devotional in the Reservoir, have you ever thought of your work as a sacred trust from God? Sometimes it's hard to envision it that way. We often think it's a paycheck or a drudgery even. But in our text in Genesis, did you notice how God invited the first humans to engage in that garden? Great question for us is there a correlation between Adam and Eve's work in the Garden of Eden and our own work? Now, I don't know what you do. I mean, maybe you were a student, maybe you're an employee, an employer, a parent, an artist. Maybe you're retired. Maybe you are a caregiver. No matter what you do, how does your work correlate with Adam and Eve's work in the Garden of Eden? And there are other kinds of work as well. I mean, there are those who are relationship builders, those who are encouragers, maybe benefactors. Maybe you have another purpose that doesn't bring in a paycheck, but another task, another job or work that you feel called to in your life. What is that? And how does that correlate with what God has called Adam and Eve to do in the Garden of Eden? Think about your work. What are you really called to do? Again, not a paycheck per se, but what are you actually called to do, called to work with? And as we think about that and reflect on what Adam and Eve were doing in the Garden of Eden, I wonder, and you may have a different answer, but I wonder if that correlation has something to do with flourishing. Something to do with helping people flourish, or nature flourish, or the world flourish. You know, the first job I ever had was when I was in high school. And my very first job was working as a geotechnical engineering lab assistant. That's a very fancy title for saying that I was in this tiny little lab, a room, often totally by myself, running tests on dirt. It seemed absolutely meaningless. By myself, working with dirt, in mud, clay, and yet, when I was thinking about that and thinking how kind of lonely and pointless that work seemed, really it changed my mind when I realized how that testing was being used in the bigger picture. When I saw how it was helping people build safe homes, or how it provided stability for highways and other infrastructure, I realized, wow, I'm actually part of helping the world flourish. So sometimes in the middle of that work, it just didn't feel that way. It felt lonely, and it just seemed like I'm working with dirt, and does it even count for anything? But really stepping back and recognizing how God might be using us in the bigger picture is a way to help us understand that our work is something that God has given us to do to help with flourishing, whether it's people or nature or the world or in any other way. Now, certainly God doesn't need us to help things flourish. God could certainly do that all on his own. However, God actually dares to invite us into that work of flourishing because God wants us to be part of God's own loving and caring and flourishing. God invites us into that divine task. And if we really understand that, it's truly mind-blowing. If we really understand that, it takes our breath away. God dares to invite us into this divine vocation of flourishing. no matter what the specifics are to what we're called in our work, God is calling that work into a far bigger context of what God is doing in the world. So this week, let's challenge ourselves to reframe our thinking about our work. Let's remember that work is a sacred trust that God has placed in our hands, placed in your hands. Let's have that perspective this week. Okay, I'll see you next time. Have a great day.